So, I would start by saying that this whole story actually began before I arrived here. And it began with a path that was very difficult, but that prepared me for it, and I understood this after this experience of contact. I'm Marina Tonini. I'm a contactee, and in reality, nobody gives a damn. So, my name is Marina Tonini. I am a psychodiagnostic graphologist, expert of the Court of Verona. I am one of the lucky ones, or maybe not, I don't know, we'll find out at the end, to have had close contacts with extraterrestrials. Close encounters of the fourth kind, which means face-to-face encounters. So, let's say my profession was marked by this very particular, powerful experience. And therefore, in the end, I had to make a choice. I chose to work only in the psychological field of graphology to help people be more in line with the message that these creatures from other dimensions have brought me. And therefore, I continue with this mission, in quotation marks, because obviously an experience like this totally changes your life. Your existence changes radically, and therefore you make choices that are different from those of the human perspective, let's say. Because it is no longer a human perspective, it is a perspective that lies between two worlds, along with all that this entails. That's why I follow this directive, which is a directive with a principle at the end, which is needed for this historical period, like many other people who have made themselves available to be advocates of this reality, which at this point will have to be revealed. Therefore, this contact with an extraterrestrial race who have always been present, but who will soon be heard of and seen much more. This whole story actually began before I arrived here. And it began with a path that was very difficult, but that prepared me for it. And I understood this after this experience of contact. It was an accident that happened to my son when he was 5 years old that had repercussions for, let's say, 14 years, hospitals, operations, etc., but I already lived in the house before this. When this experience ended, we decided to move house. And we came to this former monastery in Rivoli Veronese. And this monastery was a place where the Cistercian monks of San Bernardo da Chiaravalle stayed. White monks, therefore linked to the Templars, linked to Mary Magdalene, to the Holy Grail, and so on. But this, however, I discovered later, obviously I didn't know it immediately, when I arrived here, convinced that it was a period of calm, of relaxation. In reality, I started taking pictures, just for fun, in the garden outside, and I started filming some strange presences, such as plasma, orbs, quite particular things. And as I kept filming them, I began to ask myself questions. I did a study on the orbs, what they were, and I realized that a lot of them were actually suspended dust, or just particles and humidity. However, many instead were colored and represented energetic entities. So I took one of these photos and I sent it to the television program Mistero, produced by Ade Capone and Claudio Cavalli on the Italia Uno channel, where there was a friend who performed analysis on photographs in the program. His name was Pablo Ayo. They didn't reply right away, as they must have received many photos. In the meantime, the contacts started. So, about a year later, I had already had the first contacts. I went to this conference where I met Joe Alberti, who is a contactee and who had organized a conference in the province of Verona. And I went out of curiosity, absolutely not believing that she had had this contact. I thought I would go and try to understand what they were saying. Actually, when I went there, I saw I had my first visual contact. These 3 extraterrestrials behind her, talking, let's say humanoid forms, and one of them was taller than the others, and was talking to her left ear. Now I don't remember her right ear. He had some kind of infinity sign on his forehead, and this symbol was clearly vibrating. And she translated what he said to her. In short, so this was the first contact, and I really didn't believe my eyes, because I thought it was a hallucination. Instead, in that conference, it turned out that 2 other people had seen something similar. So from there, let's say that it all started. Then the contacts inside the house began. I began to see holographic shadows at night, particular things. The fact is that while these events were taking place, about a year, 8-9 months after, one night, while I'm sleeping, I see this. At a certain point, I wake up with a start. I was sleeping with my back on the mattress, and I see that next to the bed there is a luminous white shapeless being. And clearly, I am paralyzed in bed. And a voice comes out of this being saying, "Don't be afraid, now the time has come to speak." Then he takes out a kind of filament that looked like an extension of a hand or an arm that comes towards me, and from the center of my 3rd chakra I see a white spiral coming out that enters the hand of this extension of this person, of this being. And in that moment I kind of lose consciousness, that is, I don't remember anything anymore. I have a black hole in my memory, and then I wake up at 8 in the morning as if it had happened a minute earlier. And I wonder why he left. He told me we had to talk, and instead he left. Then I realized that instead his words, that is, it's time to speak, referred to the fact that I should have started to divulge what was happening to me. And, in fact, a few days later, the Mistero program called me. They had received the photo that I sent a year earlier. And Ada Caponi says, "Look, we're interested in this photo. Would you come here on the show?" And I told him yes, I would also come, because in the meantime other things had happened. And so it all started from there. I went to Milan, and there is practically Raz Degan at the time who was presenting Mistero. And there was this meeting with Cecchi Paone, which was fantastic, because, in fact, there were 2 of us who were contactees. And at the end of this program, he had actually already teased us a lot, as if we were 2 crazy women. It happened that God wanted him to say, at a certain point, "Come on, I don't believe these things. I'll believe them when I see the spaceships." And I raised my hand in the last minute where the credits were rolling, and I asked Raz Degan if I could answer, and he said, "Sure." And then I came up with this phrase in Roman dialect. I don't even know Romanesco, and I turned towards Cecchi Paone and I told him, "You've got a long way to go before getting on the spaceship." And the show ended like this. So this thing was then aired and people were intrigued, in my opinion, and so they started calling me. I went back to Mistero quite a few times. We also went to Mont Musinais to do research and so on. And from there it all started, because then Magali saw the Mistero broadcast, then Channel 5, etc. And so in fact I started to talk, as this essence that had come had said to me, and from there my whole story began, and to this day continues.
Sono Marco
My
Luzzato.
name is Marco Luzzato, and I'm an independent researcher. And since 1995, I've been performing study and research aimed at creating a technological means of visual communication between dimensions. So, since 1995, I've been studying the field of transcommunication instrumental video. What is transcommunication instrumental video? Essentially, it's a psychic technique, which in its execution is aided by technological instruments, through which it is possible to literally channel and catalyze all the active energies present in the environment, and these are catalyzed into images. So, it is actually possible to observe these objective structures, and we are mainly talking about faces, or heads and shoulders, produced in the final results of this technique, which absolutely cannot be classified as illusory structures. We are actually talking about presences of intelligences, and then we'll see how it works, because I'll show you precisely the results and we'll actually see how this technique works. It has to be said that the universe is definitely changing, so we are coming into contact with frequencies and energies that compared to 10 years ago weren't possible to probe. In fact, now the vibration of the planet is changing, and it is possible to get in touch with other dimensional planes. It was once said about this process that it is an inexorably slow process, but in reality we are now undergoing an acceleration, also on a space-time level. So we have gone from this so-called slowness up until about 5 years ago to a process that is practically one which has a much faster signal structure. But, I repeat, I should show you how the technique is structured. So let's say that compared to a few years ago, the results we are able to obtain today are much more objective, and above all, the number of them has increased, and this demonstrates this level of integration.
So the meeting with Kenyo was in July of last year. And it was something I would never have imagined. When you least expect it, these things happen. And the difference with all the other contacts was that the other contacts were holographic. Instead, this was totally physical. I was in the mountains. I was going to get a vase of peppers that I had, so a vase 1 meter long by 1/2 meter wide, and I drove up an alternative road to get to the mountains. And talking in the car, but without thinking about it, I said it would be nice that they finally came down with the spaceship, stopping in the middle of the road so we could embrace. And then I continued to the mountains. But I didn't think about that sentence I said anymore, because I was only joking. So, when I got there, I did other things I had to do, and then it was time to load this vase of peppers onto my car. Obviously, it was full of water, because they had watered it. So it weighed a lot, and I couldn't lift it. I mean, I could never load it in the car. And so I was thinking how to do it. Putting 2 boards like this, I was distracted for a moment, and I dragged this vase towards the tailgate of the car. At one point, I look up, and in front of me, 10 feet away, there's a man, like a very tall basketball player, dressed improbably because it was July, and he was dressed like he came from the beach, wearing baggy shorts that reached his mid-thigh, a little 60s style. He had these pointed white shoes, very feminine, and this big shirt that had long sleeve that reached almost to his elbows. And yet this shirt was very large, despite the fact that he was so big. It was very large, and it was all tucked in his shorts in a very messy way. I looked at him and thought, look at how this guy's dressed. At that moment, he looked at me and said, do you need a hand? And obviously, immediately, I took advantage. I said, Yes, thanks, you've come at the right time, because you know my family thinks I'm the Hulk. And he, coming towards me with a big smile, said, "That's not the case." I didn't quite understand his answer, but I let it go. He came up to me and asked me how I wanted to put the vase in the car. And I said, "However it's easier for you." And he lifted the vase. I bent down to give him a hand because the vase was very long, so I wanted to take it from the opposite end, and he took it in the middle. I'd take it from the bottom because it seemed nice to give him a hand. Instead, I was left with empty hands because I couldn't see how the vase moved. I was there with the centimeters. I saw the vase in the car, but I didn't see how it got there. I was left with empty hands, as if I hadn't been able to follow the movement. In fact, I couldn't follow it because it was such an anomalous movement that it was impossible. So I was perplexed for a moment, but the incredible thing was that in that moment it was as if I had been sedated some way, because I was able to acquire information, but I was unable to put it together and respond. So, when I saw the vase, I said, "Thank you," and he leaned over and brushed my left shoulder with his wide sleeve. And when this happened, it wasn't by accident. He did it on purpose, because there was no reason for him to lean down. I shivered and I turned to him to thank him, and he just grinned, and in that moment I shivered even more. I shivered because he had teeth that weren't human. He had teeth that were perfect, white, structured as if they had been designed. However, the canines were placed horizontally towards the incisors, so they were superimposed on this set of teeth, placed horizontally, and I thought, "Oh God, who is this?" I almost felt a shiver of fear because I thought it could also be, who knows, someone who could turn these teeth, like a vampire. For a fraction of a second this came to my mind, and I didn't say anything. Then I regretted it, because I could have said something like maybe, "You're not from here, where are you from?" etc. But maybe it wasn't the time, maybe I wasn't ready. I don't know, I understood later. The fact is that at that moment I didn't realize, despite having all this proof, I didn't realize it was an extraterrestrial, because, I repeat, I was like sedated, I couldn't think properly. I started thinking about it after I got in the car after he left. By the way, when he left he said, "I have to go," and I thanked him again. I said, "Thank you so much." He walked past the car, and then I turned around and he was gone. And there too I thought, but how is that possible? The road is long, I should see him, but he wasn't there. Then I got into the car, I drove towards home, and when I was halfway there it seemed that this sedated effect passed, and I began to think that I had already seen that person, and yet I couldn't remember where. I said, "But I know him, I've already seen him somewhere." I was sure of it. I came home and I kept thinking about it, and it didn't occur to me until they had mercy and they said to me, "The friendship case." So I was really shocked, and I went to find the photos of the friendship case, and I found it was him, Kenya, this extraterrestrial who they photographed at the end of the friendship case, who was a commander of the Pescara base, if I'm not mistaken. But he is a figure who has also been questioned because they thought he was a human at the time, and in reality I had proof that he wasn't a human because he couldn't be, especially with those teeth. And therefore, in short, this Kenya turned out to be the person I met in the mountains. Then, clearly, on my way home, I started what became an obsessive thought, because the fact of having met an extraterrestrial so close up really hit me hard. I also had doubts because I said, well, what if it was someone who was passing by, who maybe had teeth malformation, who knows? So I went to look on the internet for deformation of canine teeth, but there was nothing of the kind, and so I began to think that I absolutely wanted proof. And this happened in July. A few days later, I went to the field here near the wood, and I asked them explicitly. I said, "Give me proof, because I have to know if it was one of you or it was just someone who was passing by." And within 4 seconds, a giant orange thing appeared above my house, 30 meters from the ground. It was there. I saw it. And I couldn't believe my eyes. I kept saying, "It's not true, it's not true. What is all this?" Then, at a certain point, it stopped in front of me, and I had the readiness, at least this time, to ask, "So, it was one of you then?" And then a central white hatch opened, a dazzling light came out, and then it closed, and this was the answer. Then they went around the trees and flew away. And from there on, for a month and a half, until September the 8th, which was the day before the collective in Torre del Benaco, there was an incredible coming and going, so much so that I went out in the evening and I said, "Guys, are you there?" Their lights flashed and zoomed around in the sky. And this lasted about a month and a half until September the 8th, which was the day before the collective And then, I was later told by this Kenya on a telepathic level, "We will be back because we have to talk." And so, without expecting anything, I am waiting for this to happen, without haste, when they think the time is right. The collective was requested by them, and it was a very funny story, because at the moment, when they asked me, I said, "No, I can't do it." The request was to make a collective in every city in Italy at the same minute, at the same second. Everyone was to pray in the squares together. And I said, "Right, do you think I'm Superman? We'll help you." So it seemed bad for me to say no, and I said, "Oh well, I'll try then, we'll see." And since we decided to do it, without anyone predicting it, these Telegram groups formed. I mean, I immediately had a team of people available who proposed themselves for the event. So also a coordinator for each city in Italy. So there were 45 cities, each with a coordinator who practically gathered all the people they could in the squares of each city. And a group of, let's say, structured people, where we didn't eat or sleep for 10 days. But it turns out that in the end, all this came true like a dream. Among other things, there were even groups from America. There were people from South America, people from England, from Spain. A group was formed with 40,000 people, all connected at the same time, with people who also measured the Schumann frequency in the moment of the collective which grew exponentially. It was extraordinary. From this, we have been organizing other meetings. The first was in Senigallia, where there were 1,500 people on the beach, where these beings arrived, and where the documentary maker Pier Giorgio Caria was live there with us, and he saw them arriving live. It was extraordinary. They said they would arrive there, and they kept their promise. The second collective was in June of last year, 2021. No, 2022, at the beach of Torre del Benaco, so on Lake Garda. There too were 2,000 people. And now there will be one in Rimini on the 10th of June 2023. And we foresee others with more people. They wanted this collective because they justify it with the fact that there really is an acceleration if people have the same intention and send this, let's say, primordial energy, because man represents primordial energy. The sound of creation. This sound can create opportunities, therefore it means that pathways are opening up that do not exist now. The luminous grid that surrounds the earth is empowered, and so it's as if portals of potentiality open. If intention creates, and the intent of union creates, as Jesus said, "When you unite, I will be among you." When these things happen, it is an extraordinary energetic contribution that can create different realities or accelerate events in such a way that favorable situations can be created for the advancement of the awareness of this humanity. with relative possibilities of having opportunities other than the really low and petty ones of today's human society. So, war, exploitations, pandemics, everything that lie behind them. Instead, these new opportunities are linked to the spiritual level and therefore should accelerate this change of state, which should be the one that characterizes the union between the worlds. So, the union between the worlds, the spiritual world, the material world are uniting, therefore all perspectives change. The way of opening ourselves in order to interface with what is a new dimension changes with everything that it involves. So the encounters with the extraterrestrials were of different types, in the sense that at the beginning it all started with this conference with Joe Alberti, and where I saw them as holograms. So then it was all a succession, let's say, because at the beginning I actually woke up at 3 in the morning, exactly at 3, with a voice telling me, go to the bathroom window, which is the only one facing the mountains. So I went, and among other things, it was freezing cold, because at the time there were windows without double glazing, and therefore in winter it was really difficult to stay still in the bathroom. And there was a voice in my head saying, go back to bed, it's warmer, and another little voice saying, stay there. In the end, after a short time, they reached the mountains. These lights positioned themselves and started flashing. And I couldn't explain it. I said it's impossible for them to have actually come for me. Then I bought a laser, and this laser allowed me to kind of exchange lights with them, so I realized that in fact they were there for me, and this is how it began. Then the holograms began in the house, so these very tall figures passing by or coming down from above, I saw them passing in the room below. They even showed up once. Before having my son operated on, that morning, I was unable to sleep. I was over there in that room and I was reading a book because I said, okay, in an hour we have to go to the hospital. And at a certain point, this very tall figure showed up, this very tall hologram, and I was immediately terrified because I thought he was a thief, because obviously you don't immediately think of extraterrestrials. But then, when they appeared, this kind of feeling of inner peace came to me, as if there was an emotional reset. And then I was told again not to be afraid. Then he caressed me, and I was no longer afraid, neither for Mattia, my son, nor for anything really, as if I were emotionless. So the operation took place without me having the slightest thought of anxiety. And then, in the evening, it was as if I woke up from this reset, and well, all my emotions came back. I have been in contact with many entities of different natures, because for example the one that came before I was contacted by Mistero was a mass in the form of energetic light. So I can't say it was an extraterrestrial. I don't know what it was, a maestro or something, because in any case, everything they always said took place. So I have had contacts with different types. The last time I had a holographic contacts, I was shown this sort of screen where I saw a sea of people dressed in dark clothes. They all looked like the Men in Black, women and men without children, who walked like automatons, and I asked him what this meant, and he said, these are the people who don't have feelings. We will pick them up and take them to places more suitable for their level of awareness. But the last being I saw was not a Syrian. He was just a cyborg in my opinion, because he had a kind of tag on his head, like an incision on his head where there was a kind of white patch. I don't know. The impression I had was that he was some kind of robo or something like that. Therefore they use many forms and many people, because in reality each person has his own task and is sent where there is a need for him to be sent. So, holographic humanoids, taller than us with these very large eyes and no hair, a real alien extraterrestrial figure. While there are also those that look a lot like us humans, that is, a human-like body, their face, hair and everything, but much taller, like Kenya, who seems human if you look at him. In reality, he has extraterrestrial features, but he is human. So there are many types, there are infinite types of extraterrestrial. So what characterizes the contact is not always the same type. At least in my case. For others, I don't know. For example, I have never seen the Greys. Many people talk about the Greys, this little man with big heads. I've never seen them. So I have never had any contact with negative beings, despite some ignorant people who say that aliens come to steal our soul. But maybe they only stole their soul, because in reality we all have our souls, and so there are no problems. And given the crap they say, it's probably their soul that they took. But in reality, the extraterrestrial world is a world that has infinite dimensions, infinite typologies, so we cannot give a single definition. Everyone has their own experiences with beings that are closest to their frequency level. So they made this joke, this phrase which was always used also on social networks. Everyone has the alien they deserve. And this is really true. In the sense that if you have a positive frequency, a frequency of light, you will never meet up with demons. If you have a frequency that is oriented towards, let's say, very low planes, then yes, you will probably have to do with creatures that suit your energy. So it's just an energetic relationship, like all things, because if you have negative thoughts, you'll attract negative things. If, on the other hand, you have positive thoughts, you will possibly attract positive things. Then there is also Padre Pio, who had clashes with the devil, but he never died. He always had a dialogue, let's say, even if it was a violent one. So in fact, there are various manifestations, they are not standardizable. So I'll tell you that I met Kenyo, maybe next time I could see an ET. I'm not ruling anything out, because it's a very relative to the moment you're living. Our human limitation is the one that says, things are either like this or like that. So you could have the absolute truth when in fact we have bits and pieces of truth, and you can't build a puzzle with 3 pieces. You can't pretend to say, okay, this case represents something specific, but I only have 3 pieces, so it could be anything. And therefore we are in search of the truth. We have fragments. But I learned from them never to define this type of experience, because we have too little information. And perhaps this information also goes by degrees. It's difficult. That meeting with Kenya was a very strong energy experience for me. For 2 months I was out of my mind. That is, emotionally I was struggling, because it's a dimension that obviously is not suited to us, Earthlings. It's a dimension that actually has perspectives that we are unaware of. So you can have contact with them, but in a very measured way. In my opinion, he didn't give me his hand. He didn't introduce himself to me, because he would have burned my brain. So it's a step-by-step process. So I don't presume to have all the answers, because none of us do. Even those who unfortunately get paid to be false debunkers, that is, false informants, who must obtain the low frequency of this planet, because being in hell, obviously, it's like saying, let's try to flatten feelings, which is what connects us to something bigger. So the moment a person wakes up, they become dangerous. And then those who don't want this they release a flood of watchdogs who make disclosure something in its nature negative. To make people be afraid and terrified, to think that aliens are just bad. They come to steal your soul, or eat you, or they possess you, and all this rubbish. In reality, when you clearly convince a person that this is possible, it is a person who is perhaps not structured and believes in it and creates his own reality, bases his reasoning on this because they are made for this reality, the demons who work for hell. We are in a dimension that unfortunately is infernal, and we are in the highest circles, that is, we are not in the world, but we are not the world, and therefore there are these messengers, me included, who are part of this design. They are here to try to raise the frequency, which is very difficult, because if you go to hell, the laws are those of hell. In the last circles, the highest ones, those who rise above this grim reality, there is the possibility of connecting to something greater, which is the only way to break free. As Jesus said, stay with me because it is the only way out of this reality, which in the Jewish Kabbalah is Malkut. Malkut is the field where you sow your seed and you bring it to flower. And if you bring it into flower, you perform small steps towards the next Sephira, which is Yesod, which is the spiritual master, therefore the presence. So you go through all that is the test of matter and you start considering the spirit. And that is just the beginning. So enlightenment at this level does not exist. It exists only in the minds of fanatics, because actually enlightenment is from Yesod, the moment in which you understand that reality is another. Therefore, you are the spiritual master of yourself. That is, I know who I am and what I want to look for. From there on, you start working towards the greater goal, and from there on, there are 9 more steps. And from there you begin to understand that you can no longer work for yourself, but the moment you are in the spiritual master of yourself, you start working for the greater goal. If you go back to working for yourself, you go back to Malkut, like in the game Snakes and Ladders. So from Od, which is the awareness of working for the greater goal, then you pass to victory, to beauty, to everything that is a reality of qualities that serve to move towards the idea of God, creation. Therefore, strength, beauty, the hidden truth, everything it takes to become truly enlightened. But there is a long way to go. It's not easy. And so, this is what happens. In short, they clearly try to make people stay in hell, because this is a prison planet. So, in fact, what is needed is to try to free oneself from this. And it is done only through the ability of looking beyond.
What is interesting and what is necessary to understand is that the instrumentation is an end to itself. We create a configuration that is suitable to receive and therefore exploit the energy of mainly the medium or the operator, but also the energy of all people present. Then, when we talk about energy, we clearly think a lot about quantum currents. By now it's all etheric, but what exactly is energy? Energy is mainly an exchange of information. It is also essential to understand that to carry out this kind of experimentation, a technical preparation is necessary, but not only technical preparation. We are mainly talking about a psychic preparation, which is done the day before. And what is curious and sometimes even nice is that when this technique is implemented for about 20 minutes, half an hour, you then have to rest, because you don't have the possibility of being able to speak correctly, because some areas of the brain are involved. This mainly involves the operator, so more often than not, the Broca area is involved, which is the area of language processing, and therefore it sometimes becomes quite difficult for me to string words together. However, this is still part of the multiversal nature that involves us, because we literally move part of it to other dimensional planes. So, I'm very fascinated by the fact that it is possible to actually travel the universe by actually changing our brain frequencies. It is very essential to understand that we are made up of multiple dimensional planes. We will increasingly be living in this multiversal reality, which is being revealed through these techniques that are purely non-human techniques, made available to understand certain processes. Therefore, we will certainly understand that it is possible to establish an electrical bond with matter. Therefore, it would also be essential to go and see which processes are involved in the context of these transcommunications, because through them it would be possible, for example, to perhaps understand intergalactic travel. We don't know everything they study, for example, in the CERN laboratory. Some studies are disclosed, others perhaps are not yet well known or are being hidden. And I'd like to show you something. Let's see, depending on how the energy is structured. Practically, we are observing the passage of energy. We are practically moving this device. When the new science will be able to understand that it is possible to establish an electrical bond with matter, it will also be able to explain certain phenomena. In this case, we are dealing with tunnels that completely interconnect us to all that we define as physical matter. Actually, in the apparently empty space, there are these neuralgic or neural structures. And the study that has been done is also very interesting, and this is news that was published in 2014 at the University of Santa Cruz in California, and a study group led by the scientist and astrophysicist Sebastiano Cantalupo. And in this study, thanks to the illumination of a quasar, it was possible to observe in a precise sector of our universe a structure that was very similar to the structure of the brain. Therefore, it was possible to observe what we would call neuralgic structures, similar to neurons. In reality, this was made possible thanks to the illumination of a quasar, and this quasar, illuminating this area, illuminated an area where gas was present. This gas, I remember that the news was, let's say, disconcerting in some respects, because they published it with big headlines in large letters, saying they had discovered the matrix of the universe, that a web of gas interconnects all the galaxies and all the other stellar elements. In reality, it wasn't the gas that interconnected all the stellar elements and the galaxies. The gas was simply attracted by the force of gravity produced by the dark matter, which is not possible to observe. And it is not possible to observe the presence of this, analyzing the force of gravity that it produces. And therefore, in an apparently empty space, it was possible to examine the presence of these structures, without which all the elements present in space would fall into the void. Therefore, everything that we clearly observe is actually governed by other physical laws that we do not yet know, which the new science will surely be able to understand and then include. So thanks to all this, it will also be possible to understand that these multiversal realities simply express a nature of the universe, which at the moment is more unknown. Also because we still don't know exactly which other realities are adjacent to ours, and certain phenomenology is changing, and therefore we are coming into contact with dimensional planes that were unknown until yesterday. I also call this the return of the ancient, because in ancient times we were clearly already in contact with other beings, so with other civilizations. So surely there have been other cosmic events that have cast this veil, not to mention, of course, the religions. Then there was Christianity. In short, they did everything to essentially castrate man's spirituality through fear and other laws, let's call them that, which then always, through fear, they decreed the annihilation of man himself. I really hope that since the Earth is now actually going through an area of space full of new energy, here I really hope that we are precisely in the opening, that precise events will finally be able to re-sanctify this ancient rift. Because unfortunately we have been kept for many years in the dark about too many things, and certainly if the skies are reopening, there will be a reason why phenomenology is increasing. There will be a reason, and it will no longer be possible to turn a blind eye. And therefore, surely now the paradigm lies elsewhere. This is the resulting signal generated by the blender. Here we can see, I have just switched on the machine right now, we are seeing the structure of the noise. Just think that this noise has been generated digitally. Therefore we have a series of zeros and ones, a binary language, which is expressed in an image, at a random level. Well, there would be a lot to say about the characteristics of digital randomness, because it is not really random, but we know that. Then it also depends a lot on the calculation capacity of the machine, and there would be so much to say about this too. Anyway, this signal is captured. It passes through this acquisition circuit, which distorts its characteristics, and through another acquisition device we can see the results. I can block the signal at any time. Now it's very bright, so what do? We go and calibrate it, because the energy is always changing. Before it was lower, and now a little higher. So at any time I can discriminate the signal better. Then a setting is made. I repeat, it's all in the open. So now that we are still in the partial mediumistic phase, if I block the frames at any time, we can perhaps see partial images. Let's see. You can see here that they are still trying to get in contact with us. Let's see if we can get a partial image. What's the probability of finding faces, heads and shoulders, or other types of images inside a chaotic signal? That is, it's essential to understand what is meant when we speak of objectivity. Here too we can start to see something. It's always important to go and probe. Then we can at any time go and put the image out of focus, and other results also develop, as you can see. The process we have seen before, when we find the right defocusing point and the right acquisition point, we know that they're there. That's when we see, for example, here, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but there's a hint of an image. And we're not in the same mediumistic phase as before, clearly. Let's see if we are lucky enough to find a partial image. Because once the energy is expressed, then it discharges. Just a moment. Let's give it more. Let's see. Through this small instrument, it's possible to vary the quality of the energy emitted. When we have a radiant force that is expressed, a movement is always produced. So we have a kinetic force that acts as an expression of the level of communication of this energy. It's not as high as it was before, but it's there. It's always important to vary this type of process. Let's see. You can see here underneath. Maybe you can see there's a hint of an image. I don't know if the camera can see it well, it's too weak, but something can definitely be glimpsed. So I repeat, when you go into the mediumistic phase, let's see that in reality I make some recordings. I mean, in reality I'm using the camera because I have to scan everything. I want to see if maybe something interesting was formed by blocking it in precise points. Let's see. Let's see if we can get... See here, below, you can see that there is something on the forehead, but it's weaker though. And we can go and see it in more detail by changing this force. Let's try to change it. It's fading a bit. I don't know if you'll want to show this part, because perhaps it's a little more tedious. But look here, see? Also here, you can see it. Yes, here too we have this. This too is interesting, it's live. Let's see how this is made up of a whole series of points. Let's see what happens. And lo and behold, as it slowly forms. Once we have found the defocusing point, let's call it that for convenience, which is the entry point, we can go and do all the experimentation. So it is also important to experiment, to integrate certain frequencies, also because after you experiment, you are no longer the same person. We continue to experiment and see where all this experimentation will lead us. And this is very interesting to see. These are the results that are presented within our study group, and which is held once a month in Milan, and it's called the Medius Project. Here we present this kind of experimentation, and we have really established that the more participants there are, the more clearly we have this quality of results, which is sometimes really plausible. I'll show you another one. You can see here a face. This is a more photographic face. Also here, look. Here too. Here we even have a scene. We can see some figures, some anthropomorphic figures. Also here. This is another being with symbolic structures on the forehead. Here too. Here too, there's a very beautiful one that has now become historic. Look how wonderful it is. Perhaps you should turn off the audio. Here too, and this is a being that certainly belongs to a precise hierarchical order, because it has a very regal appearance. We have truly distinct clothing details, and in the chaos of this image they manage to modulate some areas, to merge some points, and they therefore succeed through this manipulation which takes place. I repeat, at a quantum level, they manage to represent themselves. Everything is out in the open, and the experimentation is an open experimentation. The scientific bodies who wish to observe the phenomenon closely are invited. So I repeat, we are talking about concrete facts, because only through these can we clearly move forward.
In fact, they are trying to achieve the 2030 agenda, in essence, which is being able to possess the human race in such a way as to control it from the microchip, which is the mark of the beast. As the vaccine was the mark of the beast, as were all the things they try to make us believe, basically. So there was an attempt to destroy the human race with COVID, which in the end didn't work. They made a mistake, so we are not dead, all of us. But really, what they aim to do is to destroy humanity with bioweapons. And this is the new form of war, let's say. Moreover, the war in Ukraine is just a pretext to be able to defeat, let's say, the only force on the planet that does not go along with this 2030 agenda, the Illuminati, therefore the New World Order. Putin doesn't agree, so it's the only spanner they have in their works. As a result, the war in Ukraine is a pretext, as the great Giulietto Chiesa said, to allow the possibility that this battle could take place. In reality, this too is, in my opinion, a scam, because they know very well that clearly this battle would be destructive for everyone. Although clearly, if they can't get what they want, maybe, since they are crazy fanatics, they could probably think, oh well, if I can't have the world, then no one can have it. And in this case, there may be a premise for nuclear war. And yet, my friends have told me that they are following this possibility closely, because if this possibility were implemented, it would be the excuse for them to intervene en masse. So, even if they decided to allow a nuclear war, they would have stopped them, not so much to save humanity, because death doesn't exist, so in fact we'll start over from another place, but also because a nuclear war would also affect other systems. Therefore, and above all, the beings that populate this planet, who are not us, because it is clear that there are extraterrestrial races that are inside the Earth, or are in points of the Earth that we cannot imagine, because we know very little about ourselves, including the globe we are on, which could actually be part of the globe. So the flat Earth theory isn't correct in those terms, but it could be an idea for what could actually be the truth, because, in fact, we know very little. Everything we know has been fed to us. So, in reality, the extraterrestrial races that populate this planet are many, and one could never destroy with a nuclear war everything that is part of a system that also involves other systems. Therefore, we are ants, and since ants that stink cannot be educated, as has happened many times in history, that a reset simply takes place. Whoever is able to continue, continues, the others stop. It happened with the dinosaurs, so it could happen again. I believe that in any case, our evolution takes place between worlds, between our various experiences, and therefore, as Heraclitus said, we always transform ourselves. Therefore, everything flows and is never the same. And therefore, what we can do is evolve our souls. Indeed, it's the only direction we are headed. So what we must understand, regardless of the extraterrestrials, is precisely the direction we have. That is our evolution. Instead, what we manage to perceive is only an involution linked to convenience, to what is more comfortable, the most insubstantial things that make us pass the time without being aware of it. Therefore, in fact, our evolution is that which concerns consciousness. That is, it's not a question of science, but it's a question of consciousness. Therefore, this is the answer. In all lives, in all the universe, in all directions, in all motivations, it is always a question of conscious. So if one understands this, one doesn't even ask so many questions. One just goes on.
So, during your interview, Marina, we did a lot of experimentation, and I ran some metavision sessions through the Blendar machine, which is a machine of my design that generates a chaotic flow at the luminous level. This chaotic flow starts from a noise, therefore it is very reminiscent of this structure. We'll see it later. It's very reminiscent of the noise that could be observed by turning on an old television set to an empty channel. We are talking about analog transmission in this sense. And then this structure is then defocused by a whole series of lenses, so it's a real optical complex that distorts its characteristics, and this signal is created that I'm showing you now, which is chaotic. You don't understand anything. During the channeling phases at the metavisual level, these structures are generated. You see here that you can see very little, but we also have partial results. It's often possible to observe attempts at manifestation with partial faces and so on. Here I'm going to get, after the basic recordings are made, I'm going to get those results, which are precisely the most objective. Even here we have a partial face. For example, it was appearing here. This is a small one. But now I would like to show you instead those results which naturally turn out to be noteworthy. So let's go to frame 221. Look here. We have two faces, one of which is right in the foreground. And I'll also show you how these come out. So these bright points merge and generate these faces, these head and shoulders, but sometimes there are also life scenes. Today we mainly received faces, you can see. Often and willingly, when Marina, you do your conferences, we've collaborated together, these beings emerge, who always have these symbolic structures on their foreheads. Here it seems more, let's say, feminine. Perhaps the features are softer, though it varies a lot. So you were talking to me about beings. Yes, here too. Let's go to frame 361 instead. It's very weak. This is a small face. Here it is. You can see it, that the nuances change according to the frame, the level of the persistence of the results. So here it's smiling. Let's go and see another recording. I always keep the acquisition times, above all when conferences are held. Perhaps something was being discussed, and to see if it was relevant. Also because we have seen that often the entity of the outcomes is regulated precisely by the context in which one goes to experiment. Let's go to frame 184. And here too we have a face, a very round face with these big eyes. Here too there's a hint of an image. There's a hint of a smile here too. So let's go to frame 1172. Here too we have others, a partial face, almost complete, more masculine. This one is more feminine. The details change one frame to another. Very particular.
Go back a little, Marco.
Go back. Even further.
No, go on. Okay.
Yes, they often overlap. Sometimes it's possible to observe the presence of another face, or the same one in the process of moving, because we are dealing with 50 frames per second. So we have a 50th of a second in which these images arrive at speed, and often we see a small face and a larger face, or they are more dissected realities that we go to examine and scan, or simply it's the same image in movement because the image reaches us through real space-time tunnels. That is, this type of reality is now expressing itself on several levels. Now we'll go to the other experimentation at 3:22 p.m. Frame 105. Here we also used greater exposure because it was darker. Here there are more faces. I don't know if you can see them. Yes. Yes, they are in two different contrasts. Perhaps this is clearer. Exactly. And always with this nose, there are a lot of these lion face structures that come out, and they recall the aeons of which Plato also spoke about.
Aeons, yes.
Then frame 1242. Here there are two eyes. These are also a partial image.
Look at how you can see the eyes. It's incredible how you see the eyes.
They are looking over there and these here. Perhaps here is the hint of some other presence, and we have seen that when there are more people in the environment, the results tend to be even stronger, therefore even more objective, even more plausible, depending on the quality of the energies.
Always more defined.
Always more defined, yes.
And this here, look at it. Even if it is not defined,
as if it were overexposed.
You can see it very well.
Exactly. Very fascinating and very interesting. But the basic concept that I would like to make people understand is this. We talk a lot about the matrix. The matrix is interconnected everywhere. Because now I'll show you something that I always illustrate during our conferences. For example, so if I asked, what is this thing? We spoke earlier about noise, no? These black and white dots. What do they tell us? Nothing. They are not intelligible. So what if I said that in reality there is precise information here to bring a level of communication from this, which practically speaks mainly of unstructured light? It clearly has a level of communication that brings us something objective. I'd say that it is important to extend one's vision of things, and here too we are talking about extension. It's a somewhat particular topic. So if we extend each point, now I will show you what happens. Look, we enlarge each dot. And as we enlarge, an image is formed. Here is a face. And we go back. It's more or less what happens with, and this is a bit technical, with holographic plates, a whole series of rows of strange dots that say nothing. However, when sprayed with the right instrument, with lasers, the three-dimensional image is created. Therefore, in this case we are dealing with channels. We have a destructured light, which travels on binary levels, because we have the blacks, which are the absence of energy, and whites, which are the presence of energy, which then, put together, automatically make us understand how it's possible to communicate with other universes by exploiting precise components related to light. It's a reality that is expressed through photonic structures, luminous structures, and here too I go back to reiterating that new science will surely understand that it is possible to get in touch with other dimensions, let's say with other dimensional planes, perhaps by exploiting this type of characteristics. Before we spoke of intergalactic travel, but we can already probe these multiversal realities through this type of experimentation, and I repeat, these are purely non-human techniques made available to make humanity understand certain mechanisms. They should be studied. Some time ago, I launched an appeal to the scientific community asking, why not try to evaluate this class of phenomena? And they answered, we generally know about these phenomenologies, these manifestations, but we prefer to study other things. And here we understand how being so conservative sometimes leads us to levels of ignorance. And we'll see what happens now. I'll show you another result. This instead starts from the finished result. We have this face, and here it is now, back to its origin. So we have a destructured light that actually contains information. So what seems null or casual to us, in reality there are other realities present, other realms, not just realms of consciousness. If we manage to tune in to this reality, we can clearly bring not only our conscience, but our whole being precisely onto other dimensional levels. But that's what's happening anyway. We were talking about it even earlier in the interview. But I'm confident that something good will certainly happen very soon. Indeed, it's already happening. Because you too, Marina, you're receiving communications that make us understand how this multiversal reality is actually integrating.
Yes, it's already part of us. But that now we can capture it.
Yes, but it's all in the open. We have said it several times. But it must be said that perhaps this disclosure, perhaps they could begin a more forceful disclosure, but the skies must necessarily open. If they don't open, but they are opening.
They are opening.
They're opening, we know that. But you never know what kind of language to use sometimes to reach everyone. But now there's no longer a need even to use metaphors now, and that's the case.